All right. So getting started with, I think last time we did App ID, right? So now we're going to be working on just the security profile and what that looks like. And it's part of the security policy when you work with that. So in the content ID side, this allows us to do what's called an advanced threat prevention engine and the policies to inspect and control that content that's going through the firewall. We did that a little bit with our App ID stuff the other time. So we can scan for vulnerabilities, exploits, viruses, spyware, malicious URLs, and even restricted files and data. And it gets pretty precise as to what we can pull through there. So in that security profile, we can do checks for viruses, spyware, malware. This is really where we get into the concept of an IDS, which is an intrusion detection system. And then we also have the IPS, which is intrusion prevention system on that side. So in the security policy, when you create those policies up above, you have this option for profiles and these fancy little icons that go across. And that's where you'll see things like antivirus, spyware, vulnerability protection, the URL filtering, et cetera, going through. In those threats, you'll notice in the logs, if you go to the threat logs, you'll see which type matched to that specific one. So whether it was spyware or vulnerabilities, whatever was showing up in that site. In those profiles, there's a couple default ones. So if you go out to your objects tab at the top, security profiles and vulnerability protection, there's some there that are set up by default. So you'll have a strict and you'll have a default. And what those rules will specify what's going to happen on a detected event. So on a strict event, you're going to have something like if it matches a simple client critical and whatever critical severity, whether we reset the connection, do nothing, et cetera, going on through. And so usually you'll clone one of those default only profiles and then edit that, or you can just add a brand new one down there in the lower left-hand corner. On those prevention rules, so again, each one of these profiles or each one of these services down at the bottom has their own profiles you could set up. And you can set up different profiles that would be used differently across the network. So for example, we may set one that's universal for all three of those policies, but for the ones that are just on our users network going out to the internet, we may very well want to lock it down even tighter. So for example, we have the ability to do data filtering. That one may allow us to block social security numbers, things like that you type in. It will not allow that traffic out. It detects that through regex as it's going through and blocks it. So to add those, you can come into your vulnerability protection, pick what you want. So for example, they created one here called the Corp VP profile or vulnerability protection profile. They give a description, and then you can pick the CVEs that it'll end up matching for this particular profile. And so those CVEs, you guys familiar with that term? Those are your common vulnerability exploits that are out there listed for all cybersecurity guys. You can end up pulling the CVE or a vendor ID that may match. So for example, that's a Microsoft one going through there. And then how you want to do it, whether you want to capture the packet that went through, so maybe we could expect it later. Under the category, it may match one of these, so like a scan or maybe a brute force attack that's trying to come in where they're trying to figure out your passwords, et cetera. We can break any one of those going through there. And then here's another example of one. So for this vulnerability protection one, we're going to make sure that we have SCADA controller type stuff, that's being blocked, any kind of SQL injection vulnerabilities that are listed there. All of this would get detected by our profile for any traffic going outbound. All right, let's see. Inline cloud analysis. This basically just allows us to take a look at what's coming in so we can take a look for something like SQL injection that's happening live, or maybe some command injections that are going through there as well. Gotta remember to use my pointer. All right. Antivirus security, there again, has a defined profile if you choose to turn it on. You could also do extra ones or create your own brand new profile here. This also has the ability to start taking advantage of Wildfire, and we're going to talk more about that later. But Wildfire takes action based on signatures that are delivered by that service. Or you could do an inline ML action, which is going to use ML or machine learning in order to scan traffic in real time to see if it matches any of those Wildfire signatures. On the antivirus side, again, you can start protecting other protocols coming in. So something like SMB or your basic window share type traffic, or whether you want to reset those, you want to drop those packets, whatever you choose to do, if it matches an antivirus signature. The signature exceptions is sometime important if you guys are doing some kind of file transfer through the network and you know a specific one you want to ignore, you could add that in there. So for example, if you were to download Nmap as the IT guy, right, it's going to block it because it's going to recognize it as a scanner. So you could overwrite that signature in here and say, no, just ignore those type of packets coming through. Sometime that can be important, like if we have an executable file that somebody runs on our network, we know we created it, but we didn't pay for the signature certification for that to be a known thing. It's going to detect it more than likely as a vulnerability. We can overwrite that in the firewall to say, skip that, don't ignore that. All right. And then again, that inline ML basically allows us to do machine learning in order to dynamically identify any kind of malicious executables that would come through or PowerShell scripts with a known link, that kind of thing. So even if they tweaked a little bit of the things in those shells, it would do machine learning to say, that's pretty darn close to things that we know are bad. We're going to block that. Or you could have it flag it, or maybe just alert you, whatever you choose to do over on this side. Anybody got any questions on those first two profiles? The next one's going to be the anti-spyware one, very similar to everything else. You're going to have things that would match like simple critical, simple high, medium low, and each one of those is going to allow you to come out here and determine what that is. So for example, a backdoor type policy, if we wanted to make sure that we didn't do that, we did an extended capture on it, and maybe we reset the packet, or we're looking specifically that matches these categories. So this one would be something like backdoor that's selected here. That means that this particular file is going to match the signature of a backdoor. And a backdoor is just a way for us to get into the machine. It's usually phoning out to somebody. That comes back to that C2 thing we talked about with command and control. A hacker or an attacker is going to compromise your PC. They want to immediately set up a backdoor so they can get back into it. So that if you delete however they came in, there's still a service running in the background so that you can connect back to that PC. A lot of times they'll put a little piece of software on there that just sends a homing beacon back to an Amazon virtual machine out in the cloud or wherever they're hosting it at, and it makes your PC phone back to them. And they can constantly change this through DNS on this side. So they say, hey, phone back to remote.jasonzeller.com, and that remote.jasonzeller.com could change anytime I change my DNS. That way, if I get a machine that gets flagged as a bad system, I just remove that, put that DNS entry into something else I have overseas. And then your phone or your laptop starts reporting back to that. All right. That comes back to this DNS-C2. That's basically what I'm talking about, that command and control network. Backdoor would be the same way in that. A good one that I run into on the daily for this type of stuff is I use a piece of remote software called Mesh Central for working with all my clients. If you guys have ever worked on help desk, you might have used Bongar or some other tool for them to remotely access that machine so that you can work on it for them. Mine just happens to be called Mesh Central because I don't actually sign the certificate on mine, then it's always going to get flagged in the firewall sometimes. So I have to have people go in there and manually overwrite it, or I have to pay the $3,000 for the certificate to license it to my company. So it's legit. It's just like Bongar and those guys are going to license their stuff, right? That's their whole business model. But if you go to ones that you're not paying for, like TeamViewer and those are all licensed and they all have the certificate for the EXE file that you download. But you're also paying $100 a month or whatever for having that service or more. All right, let's see. This is back to just those different profiles of things that you can add in, the type of traffic going through. So if you have some auto runs that are being executed and a bunch of traffic goes across, we can set up alerts, or we want to flag those coming through. DNS signatures, there again, this allows us to come in with malicious domains that we know are bad. That is attached to what is called an EDL, or an external dynamic list. This is usually something that you would purchase from another vendor. So there's a bunch of different dynamic URL lists out there that block known bad URLs. You subscribe to their service, they give you an FTP link, you set up the system to connect to that, and it constantly pulls down that new list. So somebody else is maintaining a literal text file of bad URLs that are usually broken up in categories. And then that way, when you suck in the list, you can immediately blacklist everything on that list. So yes, I could just block Facebook and stuff like that in the firewall, but I could also have an entire text file of a ton of URLs that are known to be bad. And we use this out in the industry quite a bit, these external dynamic lists for that. The good policy is to always set them up to a sinkhole, which means they get routed to nowhere. So a sinkhole, you can think of it like a literal sinkhole. You send the traffic to it, it just kind of goes and tar pits it down. There's nowhere for them to go beyond that. We don't drop it, we don't reset it, but we do flag it on our side so we can see that people are trying to go to that URL. You can also use a Palo Alto Network's IP address, or optionally even an internal IP address that you want to force them out to on that DNS sinkhole that's down here at the bottom. All right. DNS over HTTPS, this is kind of a newer thing that a lot of people are doing. So in the past, if you wanted to go out and get internet or DNS, right, you just set quad 8s on everything, right? If port 53 traffic's going across, that's requesting DNS, then I can see what your DNS requests are. I can't actually see the packets, right? They may be HTTP or HTTPS. Therefore, if it's HTTPS, it's encrypted. I can't even see where you're trying to browse out to. However, I can always find out where you're going because I can see your DNS packets flow back and forth. And that's requesting google.com, then getting translated, then I assume you're at google.com. What DNS over HTTPS does is it basically takes those DNS requests and now sends it over SSL, therefore it's encrypted. So a lot of people want to enable this because then anybody can not see their traffic, right? I'm no longer sending basic 53 traffic across there. I'm actually encrypting it as it goes through the network. You can think of it like a VPN, but this is at a different level than a VPN would encrypt traffic. You may want to block that on your network. So you wouldn't want employees doing DNS over HTTPS if you're wanting to see where they're going on your network, right? Because it would require us to encrypt, or in this case, decrypt all that SSL traffic, which we can do, and we're going to do in a future week here where we actually deny all of that. So a lot of times you'll end up blocking any kind of encrypted traffic DNS going across here. Another reason you may want to do that is because if somebody's compromised your laptop, there again, if you're having it go out to imabadhacker.com, sending that traffic back that way, we would see that in the DNS records and block it. If it's being encrypted over SSL, it's less likely that we're going to see that traffic, and therefore it just passes through our firewall. Again, we can't just blanket kill all HTTPS traffic, right? Our network would never function. Users are going to scream, complain that nothing's happening. All right, so a sinkhole operation, this is basically where you have an infected host over here of host A. It's going to try to connect to your local DNS server, which is then going into our firewall. In this case, this is one of the same. From there, if we're trying to go out to this bad Russian website out here, we are trying to connect to this remote server. We're going to end up rerouting that over here to a sinkhole address of, say, 1234. So instead of it actually going out to the bad host, we send it out here to just a sinkhole that's going to collect all that data. So there again, I guess they had clicks for that. But the DNS query comes out from a malicious domain. Our local DNS resolver is going to forward that out to the firewall. Firewall goes, hey, that's a bad signature. We're going to end up responding back with the sinkhole address for that DNS request. So we're kind of man in the middle for DNS requests as they come through there. Let's see here. So when they get a request to 1234, at that point, we get recorded in the host log so that we can go back and look at our threats and see what's going on. You can make DNS exception requests within there. So for example, if they need to go to example.com, we go ahead and allow that to bypass the sinkhole as it's going through there. So again, there may be some reasons why we need to overwrite this. If for some reason it was bad in the past and now it's a good URL, maybe we need to overwrite that here. Or for whatever reason, it seems to be just causing issues, we can hard say this will always pass. So maybe internal DNS requests, things like that, that aren't actually out there public, we may shove them in on that thread. Let's see, inline cloud analysis. Again, this is just designed for us to help detect that kind of command and control traffic going over a bunch of different protocols, because hackers are trying to send it over stuff that you would normally just allow through your firewall. So now they're going to use machine learning. Most people try to call it AI. It's not, it's just machine learning side of it in order to determine whether or not those are actually close. At that point, again, you can either alert, allow it, or drop it, or you could even end up resetting that traffic in that point. Let's see here. EDL, again, is that external dynamic list, or we could set up our own IP addresses to exempt from the profile. So whichever way we want to go. All right. So to view those malicious domains, we could go through, look for anything that has a source address of our internal server or one that's infected. Outside is going to be some external DNS, and we are sending that to the sinkhole. All right. So if you see this in your threat logs, we can see somebody's attempting to connect to one that we know is bad. We can then figure out what's going on. A lot of times you should check these daily or even run a daily report to figure out what's going on with these particular lists. And so out in industry, this is literally what I do. I wake up, I go check those firewall logs, see if I got any new major threats coming in or things that are getting identified as threats, but not really threats. This threat log will tell me all that. Another one I have to do and check right after that is Global Protect, and we'll talk about that, which is Palo Alto's VPN service. Those are being ultimately attacked by 28,000 IP addresses right now. It's horrible. So I actually have set up a blacklist, in which case I comb through those logs. It pulls any IP address that's been trying to hit us 3 times in a row. And once it does that, it sends it to a text file, and then that text file dumps it into a blacklist in the Palo Alto in a security rule at the top, where I just say, hey, if it has this tag, which is blocked IP, block that thing. And so that number has grown from like 100, 200 IPs. I think the other day I had 6,300 IPs in there. And that's purely just from people attacking us. So the Palo Alto is actually blocking what it thinks are malicious IPs. Then it hits my filter, which is based on just people that we know are already attacking us. Well, this all works the same way. That's why I bring it up. If you come in through these threat logs, so once I got the Global Protect thing figured out, which in this case, you typically log in with your Global Protect in order to download the file so that you can run Global Protect on a laptop. That web login portal is what they're sitting there hammering on. So if I kill it, great. Now the employee tries to connect to the VPN, they just need to get the software from me. There's 8 people in the company. It's a whole lot easier for me to send them a link to the download. If I had 500 in the company, that's probably a different story. I'm going to have to do or deal with it or find a better way to deal with that traffic. Threat logs are a whole different thing. If I start seeing a bunch of scans like spyware come in, now I got to start pulling those IPs out of this part, which I can do through an API in Python. That's why we train you in Python. I suck all those addresses out of there. And once I see more than 5 of those in a given time period that I determine, I'm going to go ahead and add those to the blacklist. There's a couple different ways to set up that blacklist. One of those is this external URL. So initially, this was kind of an old school way of doing it, and that's how I first set it up, where I just hosted a text file on an FTP server. I tell the Palo Alto, go check that file every 2 minutes, and that file is constantly being regen like on a cron job, where it just goes and checks the logs. If it's bad, add it to the file. Every 2 minutes, the firewall automatically pulls that file and injects those into the firewall. That works, but you only get so many IPs that you can actually filter. It's a big number. I think it's like 50,000 or something like that. However, the way I'm doing it now is actually using the XML. And if you guys remember at the top, you have addresses objects. I'm actually creating an address object for every one of these bad ones. In this case, it's an address group called blocked IP list, and the firewall just injects those directly into the firewall. The beauty of doing that over this is I don't have to have an external FTP server to serve up. I don't have to have the code in order to automate that portion of it. I can just directly connect to the Palo Alto and inject that traffic in. So the other part of that is I can now hold 200,000 addresses, where this only allowed me 50,000 addresses. So I'm nowhere near that with my 6,300, but that number is just going to continue to grow in the firewall. Let's see, file blocking. This allows us to take known bad file names or applications that have been out there. A lot of times this is to prevent any kind of malicious data coming in or exfiltration of sensitive data going out. So this could be like PDFs. We could just flat out block PDF traffic going through there. For example, we could take applications like web browsing, any file type. We could block out 7-zip files from even being downloaded, period, on our network. We just don't allow it, kind of thing. You could determine whether this is in an upload or a download session. So maybe we allow them to download the files, but we never allow them to upload zip files, for example. And if so, either alert, block, continue. If they get blocked trying to download, for example, this bad tar file, this is the screen they're going to see in there. Right? It may be legitimate, in which case we could go over there and click continue to try to go over in there and overwrite it, in which case we would have to get an administrator to do that for us. Then they could allow that to go in the block list on the other side. But for the most part, it's meant to block it. The reason it's so restrictive in this, and most people are like, who are ever going to configure these deep? This is the reason the government uses Palo Alto the most, right? You can get super granular on all this stuff. And if you're working on one of the more secure networks in the government versus the unsecure network, you're going to have stuff like this where no, they're not going to allow zip files in and out of that network. They just, no. This is where you could use this same firewall at a very low level or a very, very high level for nitpicking what's going through. Let's see, multi-encoded files. So what does this mean? This means we may take a XML binary, AKA the config out of your router, because the hacker was able to grab it. They're going to convert that to a doc format. Then they're going to gzip it, and then they're going to send it over an HTML file. We can actually determine if it's an HTML file, we would probably allow it, right? Because it's not a zip file and it's not an XML file, it's an HTTP file. What we're going to end up doing is being able to go up to four layers deep that we can actually undo that to make sure that this inner thing is not an actual config file or something that we don't want to allow out. So it's pretty slick. It could do that multi-level encoding and decoding on that side as well. But the max level it can do is 4 coming through there. It's a quiz question, so might pay attention to that. All right, we can go in and view those blocked files. So if we go into the logs and data filtering, we can see what the file's name coming through here was. We can also see why it got blocked. So whether it was web browsing coming in, maybe we're just alerting. In this case, we actually reset because it matched US Social Security numbers. So we didn't allow that traffic out. We actually just reset the connection in general. If it shows a bunch of email links, we may just alert on that. Here you may see login, log out PHP files. We're just going to alert those in the logs so that we know that somebody was logging in and out of some system. That may be totally viable, which is why we're not blocking it. But if we find out, hey, something happened really weird after 5 o'clock, we can come in here and look at 5 o'clock and see who was doing what at that time. And in this case, they logged into some website they didn't need to, right? Maybe they got a phishing email, which then sent them to a login page that looks like our page, but it's really not. We could see that kind of stuff being trafficked in here. Data filtering, this is where we can just eliminate things based off custom data patterns. So for example, confidential data is a data pattern we create. And then we have a bunch of patterns inside. So US credit card numbers, social security numbers maybe even without the dash separator in there. It's kind of like regular expressions that you guys remember from Python. That's literally how it's doing. So it's either a predefined pattern, or maybe we're doing it off regex, or maybe even off the file properties that's getting sent out. So it checks it pretty quickly as it goes through. We can also tell it to go ahead and do a full-on data capture at that point. So if we see where it's going out, the number of times that data pattern must be detected before we get alerts, and then the total number of data pattern instances that's been going before we actually block the traffic. Again, we could block it inbound, outbound, or both directions. We could also, based off of these logs and where we're seeing that certificate go out. So these are generally like Chrome extensions where we're seeing file names go out and why they got blocked over on this far side here. All right, so where do we get these profiles? This is in your security policy. It's that very last tab that you guys are configuring. Right now, you guys are setting the action of allow, group, disable, whatever else. Down below that is where you have your profile section. Right now, this is probably set to disable. you guys would actually enable profiles and then select the profile you want for each one of these. You may only want to turn on one or two of these at a time. So you may have all but none. And for now, you're just worried about antivirus profile that you set up. And so in a corporate environment, you may have strict ones, you may have to relax it, that kind of thing, in order to figure out what's getting blocked on the network. Let's see. So you can add those in there. This initial stuff is all you creating those security profiles. Once you get them created, then you can come in here and actually apply them to the rule itself. So this rule would be something like users to internet. Now we're applying all these rules going out from there for that particular one. So once you have those applied over here on the right-hand side, when you're looking at all your policies, you can immediately determine which ones are applied over there. If you hover over it, it will tell you what that profile name is. So strict corporate antivirus is associated with this one. Same way down here, you could go down and look and see what's going on in those and whether or not those profiles are all together or whatever's in between there. All right. Anybody got any question on that one? So in your lab, you will actually be testing these this week. So when you log in and do this lab, you're actually going to set a antivirus profile, a spyware profile, and then you're going to go try to download spyware and viruses on the machine. And you're going to determine whether or not the Palo Alto actually blocked it or it did not. So happy hunting. It's actually literally going to have you go download known bad files. Don't do this at home on your own machine. Make sure you're doing this in the lab environment where it gets wiped when you're done, because you will get real viruses that come through there. So don't make your friends go download it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have to say this because it's happened in years past. People have done that kind of stuff. Cool. So we'll get to the questions. Anybody got any questions otherwise? All right. So Jason's Palo Alto tip for the week. If you are doing high availability Palo Alto, which we'll be doing here in a couple of weeks, make sure that you have backdoors set up when you're doing some configuration changes. Otherwise, you're on a call from 7 at night till 4 in the morning, like I was 2 nights ago, taking down a data center in Raleigh, in which case I had to force somebody to drive to go do that. So yes, even after years and years of experience, I did one little last click and it killed the entire thing, and including my back doors. I don't know why the back doors went down, but it was bad enough. It caused all sorts of chaos. I bring that up because it's real life and you guys will run into it. Okay. Hopefully you're smarter than me. 3 rules, or 3 questions, I should say, coming in. So which anti-spyware feature enables an administrator to quickly identify a potentially infected host on the network? Is that a data filter log entry, a continue response page, a DNS sinkhole, or a CVE number? Well, let's review. What was a CVE number? Right. Yeah. So it's the number that we would use to go figure out what this common vulnerability is for a given machine or device or whatever else. But that isn't going to tell us who's infected on the network, right? It just tells us about the vulnerability. So that's not going to work. What was a DNS sinkhole?
DNS sinkhole would be rerouting.
Yeah, it's a way for us
there was a bad DNS
to a place that goes nowhere, right?
Yeah.
There again, we could potentially see it in the logs if it was sending into a sinkhole, but the fact of just looking at the sinkhole won't actually help us in that case. So we're down to A and B. What would we see there?
A, wouldn't it?
Probably A, right? I mean, if we're seeing it in our logs that there was some data filter entry, that gives us a heads up that, hey, maybe something's infected. It could be, it could not be. It could be legitimate traffic and we just caught it on our filter coming in.
What's the continue response page supposed to be?
That is the page that comes up that says file blocked, and then you hit continue to continue on.
Okay.
That again, it won't tell you that the host is potentially infected. It just says this file's bad.
Yeah.
So we'll check our answers to make sure I'm down the right track, but 99% sure that's where we're going. True or false, a security profile attached to a security policy is evaluated only if the security policy rule matches the traffic and the rule action is set to allow.
Say true. Has to match first for it to do the. I
Yep,
guess
to even
profile
hit the
to a
profile that you have, it has to, one, match the rule in the first place. So for example, here when we had our policies, if we had separate policies on all three of these rules, it has to first match this rule and we have to have it allow, because if we had it to drop, well, then there's no reason to have these profiles, right? So we have to have it to allow, and then it has to come through here. Now, the big kicker there is whether or not you have to have it to allow. So I think you could do it to drop and then filter and allow the traffic. We'll come back to that one. Okay. Last one, network traffic matches an allow rule in the security policy, but the attached file blocking profile is configured to a block action. To which two locations will traffic be logged?
Data filtering and traffic.
Have we heard about an alarms log yet?
I don't think so.
No. So we can at least kick that one out. We have heard of the other three. Like you said, we know the traffic's going to come through this thing, so we're probably going to see it in the traffic log, right?
You see it through the data filtering log too.
Yeah, so the question is file blocking profile, does that match a threat log or a data filtering log?
Data filtering, just because it's
The file
specifically
blocking in
pertained to
this
the
case
file.
does match data filtering. Yep. All right, let's see if we're right. BC.
Said it was C. DNS single.
DNS single.
I'm sorry, BC was on this last one I was talking about.
Yeah.
You guys were right. Yeah, C up above was your sinkhole. So, okay.
I guess because it's already been like.
I guess they're talking about the feature that would do that, which is the exact reason you're doing it. In other words, if they're going to the sinkhole, they're possibly infected. I guess I kind of said that without saying that, but then you talked me out of it, even though you were right with what you said. So yes, that one should be DNS sinkhole. And then true or false, we had true, and that's correct. It does have to match and it does have to be set to allow.
Whenever it takes malicious traffic and like throws it in the sinkhole, it doesn't give them any type of response or anything on it.
It just routes it to Never Never Land. Yep. All right. So yeah, the tricky one was this one up here, which makes total sense.
You gotta pay attention to the wording.
Yeah, exactly. It's all in the wording of this question. It's what feature that comes through here. And a data filtering log is not a feature. It's a thing. Unless you're used to working on OpenSense, and then it's a feature because it's OpenSense. All righty. That also explains, like, I took over a firewall for a guy and he had it set to deny and then had actual policies that set to allow. Explains why that never worked. It's like, that doesn't sound, yeah, it doesn't sound right. And it can't be right. That rule will never happen. Which is why I have about 40 rules to clean up from what he had that didn't make sense. I don't know if it just happened over time. They never got cleaned up, but that all has to be done. So. All right. Anybody got any questions over this week's content? Oh, sorry, I wasn't seeing that, Peyton, over there. Let's see here. Yep. And does a DNS sinkhole show anything, or does the connection just fail? In this case, like I said, what it does is if I went out to fhsu.edu, and that obviously turns me back to some IP address, instead of sending you to the IP address when you make the request, I send you to some sinkhole where there's no response. So it'll just be 1, 2, 3, 4 going through there. Is like the example they sent here. You could also send it out to Palo Alto's sinkhole, and all that does is allow Palo Alto to go, what was the request? Now we're keeping track of what all these requests were so that we can add them to a list, basically, at that point. But yeah, they would not get anything on the response side of the house.
Makes sense.
So if you were on that PC and you're like, well, I can't get anywhere, and you're, doing your normal NS lookup, and I want to know why I can't get out to fhsu.edu. If this is returning something like 1, 2, 3, 4 here, I'm getting hit by a DNS sinkhole. Somebody is taking this request for fhsu.edu and rewriting it to go to someplace I didn't ask it to go.
Will your end user actually see like any type of page, or will it just like kind of infinitely spin and
Just
do nothing?
infinitely spin. Yep. Yep, by default. Alrighty. And again, that really works if they're doing DNS over HTTPS, right? Where they're going to be trying to do that lookup over a secure line. Then if we're blocking that traffic, that would keep that from ever happening. All right. Anybody else got any other questions? Cool. Then I will let you guys get to the lab. Just keep remembering to do your quizzes in your labs each week. And like I said, look in Blackboard from here on out to see if I ever have to cancel or rearrange a week. I will let you know on a Monday if that happens. And if usually that would just be that either Thursday, we're not going to have lab day, you guys just do it on your own, or I need to swap a Tuesday, Thursday like we did this week in order to make all that work. I don't foresee a whole lot of that having to happen, but there's 6 weeks left in the year. And I think there's like 2 events where I know we won't have a Thursday class lab.
Okay.
All right. And if we look real quick at just what's left, we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 content weeks. And actually, I think one of these are combined, these last 2. So when we get closer here towards the end, you guys will just be practicing for your skills assessment. And then those of you that are grad students, make sure that you guys have a grad project. You guys emailed me, got verification, you're good to go. So you can get those points as well. When we get to the end, a question that came up was, what's the final look like? The final will look just like one of your quizzes. It's in Palo Alto. I believe you have 1 or 2 attempts, and it just takes whatever score that you submitted last. And then you guys will have the skills-based assessment, which will be a lab on NetLab, in which case it will give you the generic information, but you actually have to go configure the file. You will then have to submit the final configuration file to me so that I can grade it going through.
It'll pretty much look like the beginning of the labs where it just gives you like top
You got
level
it.
information and
Yep.
none of the granular stuff.
Exactly that. Yep. That's the reason they started adding that to the labs. So you got used to, here's what we're going to do. And then it gives you a step-by-step how to do it. This gives you no step-by-steps. And that is a capstone lab that you can do over and over and over until you get the config file that you want. So you may make a reservation for 4 hours. If it takes you longer than 4 hours to get through it, I'll show you how you can go about saving it so that you can reload it the next time when you make another reservation. So you're not starting over from scratch every single time. But once you understand how to do it, you should be able to do it well within 4 hours. The first time you do it, maybe not so much because, well, it weeds out who did the labs along the way and who said they did the labs along the way is what that will do. That's the whole beauty of the skills-based assessment. And there's no way to really cheat on it per se. Like you have to go through the reservation and do it. And because I can see what you guys do on NetLab and how long you were in there and all that kind of stuff. So if you export the same XML file your buddy does and just say, yep, that one's mine, I can tell the difference between the two. Because the timestamps, everything else won't match up. And if you're going to get tricky with ChatGPT, it just won't work. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now. I tried it just to see if I could. It doesn't do it like you think it does. So, all right. Anybody got any other questions on how the rest of the semester goes? Cool. We'll close her up. Thanks, guys.